The day my daughter vanished, I did not cry. I simply stood there, staring at the empty savings book, the place that had held 40 years of sweat and tears, now reduced to a single cold zero. She had drained every last penny, together with that criminal boyfriend I had begged her to stay away from. When the door closed behind her, I realized it wasn't only money that had been taken, but trust itself, the very meaning of being a mother. 2 weeks later, in the silent house, I heard the telephone ring in the middle of the night. And from that moment, my life turned onto a different road, a road of hatred, of truth, and of darkness. This is not merely the story of a mother betrayed. This is my journey of turning pain into power, of seeking justice with my own hands, to find out whether a mother's love can survive the hell of betrayal. I remember every detail of that day as if it were a slow film replaying in my mind every time night falls. It was raining. The drops smashing on the corrugated roof made a mournful music, a steady rhythm, like a clock counting down something beyond saving. My daughter stood at the door, her hair wet, eyes glinting under the wavering yellow light. She smiled, that smile I had known for 18 years of raising her, warm and trusting. "I'm only borrowing it for a while. Don't worry, Mom." I believed her, as mothers believe their children, trusting that innocent promise. I handed her the savings book, the little book that had followed me through so many seasons, a record of sweat and sleepless nights for her. Each number was a memory, a full meal, a tuition fee, a warm coat in winter. I gave it to her, and in her eyes was a light, weightless farewell, as if she would take the money to the bank for safekeeping and return that evening. But when the door closed, the first thing that struck me was not relief that she hadn't gone far. It was a hollowness, as though the house itself had been gutted. I picked up the book, my eyes scanning the familiar figures, and my heart stopped. The final entry was a solitary 0, a cold, meaningless 0. 40 years of work, saving every coin and dime, hardships braided with the hope of peaceful old age, now reduced to a smear of dry black ink on paper. And the room seemed to settle, listening to the sound of my own breath. The rain outside felt heavier, and I stood there with the sensation of someone having just carved my heart out. I remembered her toddling across the yard, mud clinging to her feet, her eyes laughing like stars. Those images pressed on me, making my anger more than anger about money. It became a deeper loss, the loss of trust, the severing of the sacred bond between mother and child. I wondered, would that borrowing for a while ever come back? Or was it merely a cover for deception? I am not wealthy in any lavish sense, but I possess another kind of treasure. Love, years of uncalculating care, and the belief that my child would never hurt me. That savings book was proof of my whole life. Now it was empty, and with it poured a torrent of questions like rain. Where is my child? Who is that criminal boyfriend of hers? Why did she turn her back on me? The truth, cold and sharp, began to creep into every corner of the house, like a snake slowly slithering out of the shadows. I remember studying papers, bills, bank stamps I had never paid attention to before. Part of me wanted to run into the street and strike that man with the fists of a betrayed mother. Another part forced calm, as if the hard-earned survival instinct of an experienced woman warned that haste would only make things worse. I knew, deep down, that this was not only a story about stolen money. It was a wound deeper than that, a sin placed upon the child I once sheltered. And that pain would not let me remain silent. I stood before the cabinet that held small keepsakes, my worn wedding ring, photographs blurred by time, the handmade cards she made as a child. Each object testified to the life that had passed, to the simple dreams I once wove, now torn apart. The rain kept falling outside the window, but inside me, another downpour had begun. Cold thoughts, and I felt my face being sharpened by betrayal. From that pain, a quiet resolve grew. Not a hot, impulsive fury, but an embering fire, just enough to warm a wounded heart and sharp enough to sever the root that caused it. I do not know where that resolve will lead me. I only know that from the moment I saw the 0 in the book, from the moment I heard, "I'm only borrowing it for a while," like a poisoned pen, my life split into two, before and after. Before were the years I trusted, the gentle affection I gave without calculation. After is a path I never imagined walking, a quest for truth, to reclaim justice, and, if necessary, to make the one who shattered a mother's heart pay. I do not know where my child is sleeping tonight, but my heart has awakened, and the rain outside now sounds like a promise. A confrontation awaits, and I will not step back. I remember every detail of that day, like a slow-motion film replaying in my mind every time night fell. It was raining, the drops hitting the corrugated roof creating a mournful melody, a steady rhythm, like a clock counting down something beyond salvation. My daughter stood by the door, her hair wet, her eyes shimmering under the flickering yellow light. She smiled, a smile I had always found warm and reassuring during 18 years of raising her. "I'm just borrowing it for a while. Don't worry, Mom." I believed her, just as any mother would, trusting in her words, in that innocent promise. I handed her the savings book, the same book that had followed me through countless seasons, marked by sweat, sleepless nights for her. Every number a memory, a full meal, a school fee, a warm coat for winter. I handed it over, and in her eyes was a gentle farewell, as if she would safely deposit the money in the bank and return to me that very evening. But as the door closed, the first thing that struck me was not relief that she hadn't gone far. It was the emptiness, as if the house itself had been gutted. I picked up the book, my eyes scanning the familiar numbers, and my heart stopped. The last entry was a 0, a cold, meaningless 0. 40 years of work, decades of saving every penny, every dime, hardships intertwined with hopes for a peaceful old age, now reduced to a streak of dry black ink on paper. The room settling into a silence where I could hear my own breathing. The rain outside seemed heavier, and I stood there feeling as if someone had just carved out my heart. I remembered the time she toddled around the yard, mud caked on her little feet, eyes sparkling like stars. Those images weighed heavily on me, making my anger not just about money, but about a greater loss. The loss of trust, the severing of the sacred bond between mother and child. I wondered, would that borrowing ever return? Or was it merely a veneer for deception? I'm not wealthy in the sense of luxury, but I had another treasure: love. Years of selfless care and the belief that my child would never hurt me. That savings book was proof of my entire life. Now it was empty, and with it came a flood of questions like the rain. Where is she? Who is that criminal boyfriend of hers? Why did she turn her back on me? The truth, cold and sharp, began creeping into every corner of the house, like a snake slowly slithering out of the shadows. I remember examining the papers, the receipts, the bank stamps I had never noticed before. Part of me wanted to run out immediately, to strike him with the fists of a betrayed mother. Another part forced itself to remain calm, as if the survival instincts of a seasoned woman whispered that rash action would only make things worse. I knew deep down that this was not just a story of stolen money. It was a deeper wound, a guilt placed on the shoulders of the child I had nurtured, and that pain would not allow me to remain silent. I stood before the cabinet, once holding small mementos, the worn wedding ring, faded photographs, handmade cards from her childhood. Each item was proof of a life lived, of simple dreams I had woven, now torn apart. The rain still fell outside the window, but inside me, something else began to rain. Cold thoughts, my face sharpened by betrayal. From that pain, a quiet determination emerged. Not a boiling, impulsive rage, but a smoldering fire, enough to warm a wounded heart and sharp enough to sever the root that caused it. I did not know where this resolve would lead me. I only knew that from the moment I saw the zero in the book, from the moment I heard the words, "I'm just borrowing it," pierced me like a poisoned needle, my life had split into two. Before and after. Before was the years of trust, the gentle affection I had given without calculation. After was a journey I had never imagined stepping into, a journey to uncover the truth, reclaim justice, and if necessary, exact retribution on the one who shattered a mother's heart. I did not know where my child was sleeping, but my mind was awake, and the rain outside now sounded like a promise. A confrontation awaited, and I would not back down. The next morning, as the rain still blurred the glass, I opened the book once more, as if searching for a reason not to believe what my eyes saw. But the truth needs no convincing. It lay there in the cold zero on the last page. From that moment, every memory of the man who had entered my daughter's life, every word I had spoken, every warning, every frown, became sharp as a blade. Those words were no longer casual chatter between mother and child. They were proof of a danger I had touched many times, but had never been strong enough to pull her from. I had warned her countless times with the voice of a mother who had seen life. I called her, sat with her late into the night, told her stories of faces colored by lies that I had stumbled upon. "Don't," I said, my voice choking each time I saw her press her lips together. "Don't let someone's eyes decide your future." I remember using the word eyes often because eyes often betray true nature. His eyes, the man my daughter brought home as a mysterious pride, were not the eyes of someone who cared for her. They were the eyes of a predator, cold, calculating, always seeking the weakest spot to strike. I saw him for the first time in the photo she sent. A man with disheveled hair, a flirtatious smile, and a large ring on his finger like an empty promise. I did not like it, but how could I force her? She said, "Mom, he's not what you think. He understands me." And on her lips was innocent faith. The same faith I once had when I first looked at my husband. That faith kept me silent, but in my heart, I scanned for every sign. Late nights returning home, vague explanations, calls in the dead of night that she brushed off as trivial. Part of me wanted to believe, to cling to the image of my happy child. The other part, protective and experienced, moaned, "Don't let her be deceived." I knew he was not clean. I overheard clumsy rumors, mixed gossip in the neighborhood, a scam a few years back, a name on the list of those with criminal records. I pieced together small stories. One woman lost everything in a deal. Another stayed silent as if her mouth had been sealed. These fragments lay scattered, and when I tried to assemble them and tell my daughter, she denied it with a pained look. "Mom, don't make a big deal." He's changed. The word changed was like a thin veil hiding the truth. But I had seen many such veils, and behind them were people who never changed. Blind love made her dismiss everything. I watched her reach out to him, observed the power exchanges in small gestures. A light touch on the hand, a subtle smile, a commanding look she obeyed. She loved, and love blurred reason. I knew love could blind a person. I had loved someone to the point of believing everything, and paid the price. But seeing my daughter trust someone undeserving, my heart felt strangled by a mix of helplessness and fury. Sometimes I blamed myself. Had I intervened too much, driving her to seek support elsewhere? But the reason did not change. No one asked to be deceived. No one wants to be a victim. And if my daughter chose to step into the arms of a man with a criminal record, that was her choice. But the one who made her choose had to bear responsibility. That was a simple truth that a mother like me could not release. The humiliation was not just about lost money. It was the quiet shame clinging to every conversation with neighbors, every curious glance when they asked about my daughter. "Do you know where your daughter went?" The question felt like a needle piercing the flesh. I walked through the days with my head bowed, afraid to meet anyone. Each step carried whispers: betrayed, exploited, deceived. I bore it like a public guilt that was not truly mine. Yet it hurt as if I had committed a grave wrongdoing. The simmering shame in my heart stole my sleep. Night after night, the house stretched into silences, and in that silence, I heard the man's laughter echo in my mind, as if he enjoyed the power he held over my child's life. It made my blood boil, but my anger was not merely impulsive. It was coated with coldness, a determination honed over years. I did not want to kneel and beg anyone to return what was taken. I wanted to see him in court, to expose the tricks he used to make people surrender all their money and dignity. Sometimes I close my eyes and imagine another scene. My daughter waking up, realizing her mistake, running into my arms and saying it was all a misunderstanding. I wanted to believe in that miracle, to make it true, but reality was harsher. And I understood that only action could save my child, or at least help me find where she was hiding. From that humiliation, something else was born. Not submission, but a fire wanting to reveal the truth. I promised myself I would not let the one who hurt my daughter rest in peace. And if necessary, I would turn shame into a weapon to reclaim justice. That night, after I burned the paper with his face, half real, half deceitful, the house sank into silence. The fire dwindled, leaving the smell of charred smoke and a strange emptiness. I thought I would cry, but I didn't. The more I thought about my daughter, about the way she left without looking back, the more I realized that my tears had long dried up. All that remained was a sense of disintegration, as if someone had untied every string in my heart, leaving a vast void that even the night wind dared not pass through. 2 weeks passed, the longest 2 weeks of my life. The house was silent, sealed by loss. I lived in that quiet, with only the ticking clock as witness to each heavy moment. Each tick sounded like a small dagger, stabbing my heart second by second. I kept my habit of making tea each morning, setting an extra cup for my daughter, then watching it cool, ice cold. I opened the window, looking out at the backyard where she had once planted a row of small roses. Now, weeds had overtaken the garden, flowers withered, and I wondered, was she still breathing, still laughing, still existing somewhere in this world? Or had it all ended in the arms of the man I had always feared? Doubt began to creep in. Not doubt about my own fault. I knew exactly where the blame lay. But doubt about the truth. That man had disappeared from legal records for several years. Rumors claimed he had been involved in a mysterious disappearance of another woman. I had ignored it, trying to keep peace for my daughter. But now, each fragment returned like sharp knives, slicing into my memory. Could it be that my daughter had become one of those disappeared women? A woman who loved him, trusted him, only to be destroyed by him? I tried calling, texting, writing letters. All fell into a void. No reply, no trace. The police told me to wait because an adult has the right to leave if they wish. But they didn't understand. This was not a simple escape. It was a sudden, cold, terrifying disappearance. I had no evidence, only instinct. the burning instinct of an experienced mother. I knew something had happened, and the more silent it remained, the more I felt the darkness consuming me bit by bit. At night, I heard footsteps in my dreams, like my daughter running up the stairs as she did when she was small. I woke up, but the hallway was empty. Only the framed photo on the wall stared back at me, her face, her smile, eyes that had once been my pride. I began talking to the picture as if she were still there, only needing me to whisper softly to avoid waking the nightmare. Yet even the photo seemed unusually silent, as if it were hiding something. I reopened the bank statements, the last lines of transactions. There was a transfer to an unknown account in a city I had never heard of. Suddenly, everything inside me ignited. This was no longer just about money. It was a trail, a message. Perhaps my daughter was calling for help in the only way she could. I began keeping a diary, noting every detail, every day, every instinct. In that notebook, I wrote, "If you are still alive, I will find you. If you are dead, I will make him live as though he were dead." The letters slanted, ink smudged from my trembling hands, but in every word burned a fire, the fire that 2 weeks of silence had festered. I began to change. I was no longer the weak mother sitting by the window in tears. I learned to listen, to watch, to doubt everything around me. Every strange sound, every passing car light made me alert. I went to the market but avoided everyone's gaze, listening instead for his name, for whispers that seemed meaningless. I installed cameras, changed locks, wrote his name on a slip of paper and folded it into my jacket pocket. Every time I held my hand there, I felt it, like a vow. Time seemed frozen, but inside me, something was moving. Slow, cold, but certain. I felt myself crossing a threshold, from a betrayed mother to someone preparing to become a hunter. I did not know whether my daughter was alive, but I knew one thing. If he had done anything to her, I would find out. I would make him pay, not just through the law, but through the fear he once planted. On the 14th night, I sat in the dark, the ticking clock my only companion. I looked at her photo on the table. I whispered, "If you are still out there, let me see a sign." Then the wind blew hard through the window, knocking the photo to the floor. I bent down, and on the back of the picture, a line I had never seen before was written in my daughter's hand. "If anything happens to me, look for him in the northern outskirts." I sat in silence for a long while. Then I stood up. For the first time in 2 weeks, I knew what I had to do. The silence was over.
It was time to start searching for the truth. After days lost in darkness and doubt, I almost no longer knew what I was living for. The house that had once been warm now felt like an empty shell, where memories seeped through every crack, every familiar object. I still placed 2 cups of tea each morning, one for me, one for my daughter, as if she might come back. But each evening ended in terrifying silence. No messages, no calls. The police advised me to wait a little longer. But how could I wait when a mother's heart always knows something was wrong? I began to dream of her. Fragmented dreams, in which my daughter stood in the middle of a dark street, tears mingling with rain, muttering words I couldn't hear clearly. I would wake in the night, heart pounding, with a single thought echoing in my mind. She is calling for me. The days passed, each hour stretching endlessly. I no longer counted time by the calendar, but by fear. 2 weeks since my daughter disappeared. And then, what I had been waiting for finally arrived. That night, I sat alone in the living room. The dim light fell across the family photo on the wall. The three of us. Me, my late husband, and my daughter smiling brightly. Suddenly, the phone rang. The sound tore through the night, stopping my heart for a moment. Trembling, I picked up. Hello? No one answered for a few seconds. Only heavy breathing mixed with the whistling wind through the receiver. Then my daughter's voice came, trembling, fragile, as if crushed. Mom, I'm sorry. I sprang up. Julie? Where are you? Tell me, where are you? I can't come back. I was wrong. I didn't know he... Her voice choked off. Suddenly, a loud noise, like a car door slamming, followed by howling wind, screeching tires on the road, and finally, a scream. That sound, chilling, etched into my heart like a knife, and then the line went dead. I stood frozen, gasping for breath. The room felt suffocatingly cold. I tried calling back, but only heard the busy signal. I screamed her name into the night, but the only response was endless emptiness. In that instant, I understood. Something terrible had happened. I sank to the floor, my mind spinning with 1,000 thoughts. Who was with her at that moment? That man? Had he done something terrible? Or was someone else hunting them? Every fragment of memory, every warning I had given her flashed before my eyes, and inside me, fear transformed into something else, anger. I didn't know where my daughter was, or if she was even alive, but I knew one thing: I would no longer sit still. I looked up at the photo on the wall, my eyes blazing in the darkness. The weak mother I had once been died with that phone call tonight. From this moment on, there was only me, and a cold vow: even if I had to face demons, I would uncover the truth. I grabbed the phone, replaying the recorded call, the only piece left. Amid the chaotic background sounds, something was unusual. Not just the car noises, but a faint tune, very soft, like it came from a radio. I recognized the melody. It was the song my daughter had listened to when she was little, a song only the two of us knew. A sign, a hidden message. I closed my eyes, tears falling, but this time, not from despair. If she is alive, I will find her. If someone made her disappear, I will make them pay. And so, that night marked the beginning of a path with no turning back. The journey of a mother stepping into darkness, where love and vengeance merge as one. After that phone call cut short like a blade slicing through the night, the entire room seemed to constrict in a long-held breath. I stood still, clutching the still warm phone, listening to my heart pounding erratically. Amid the silence, one thought flashed through my mind: what to do with the remnants of my daughter's life? The next morning, despite swollen eyes and a head swimming with exhaustion, I decided to tidy her room as if each item could be a clue leading me to the truth. I opened her wardrobe, flipped through stacks of books, lifted each small box that once held scattered candies, fingerprints, tiny reminders of the child she had been. Everything seemed to whisper, "She's gone." But what did she leave behind? My fingers brushed against a corner of the closet where she used to hide her teenage secrets. I felt a small, worn leather notebook. The cover bore smudges of ink, hurried marks, the signs of someone carrying unspoken burdens. I opened it, and a whole world unfolded before my eyes. Hastily written lines, numbers, names. At first, the notes seemed innocent. Meet 7 a.m., Old Cafe. Send 5 million. Act 012-XXX-XXXXX. And my heart clenched. But as I read on, the truth emerged. This was not a diary of innocent teenage love. It was a record of spoils from someone who preyed on the vulnerable. Names of women, wiped out financially. Homes destroyed. Bank transfers interspersed with brief descriptions. Tricked with investment promises. Changed number after 2 weeks. Lies when drunk. I turned each page as if navigating a labyrinth. Some entries were in bold letters, emphasizing accounts from which he had withdrawn money, accompanied by addresses, fake ID numbers, even small details like wears black shirt, scar on right wrist. My whole body went cold. Stories I had overheard in markets, rumors I had tried to ignore to keep my daughters safe, now stared at me in black ink on paper. The women on the list were not numbers, they were lives. Ms. Hong lost $120 million, husband left, child had to drop out. Ms. Lan sold house, fled. Each line a wail, a ruin of trust exploited. There were even pages that seemed to be my daughter's own journal, short, clumsy sentences scattered among names and bank accounts. He said he'd take care of you, Mom. He promised to return it. Don't worry, Mom. Each line ending with a number. She had tried to document every transaction as if convincing herself that the numbers could speak for her, but cold numbers cannot convey pain. I read her hurried script and felt the torment of a child torn between trust and a predator's game. In one corner, scraps of paper, transfer receipts, shipment notes, even an old business card from a faded investment company. I pieced them together in my mind like a puzzle. Account A receives money, transfers to account B, funnels through a phantom business, then withdrawn as cash.
Each fragment formed a path, an explanation for the disappearance of the money from my savings. I could see the scam woven with promises and fake smiles. There was a special page carefully crossed out where my daughter, or someone writing for her, had detailed the man, nickname, usual haunts, and the line in capital letters like an accusation. Cannot trust. That line pierced my heart. She knew, and she was still with him. Why? Blind love? Promises of a better life? Or fear? The question drove me nearly insane. I laid the notebook on the table under the yellow lamp, reading and rereading until the words seemed to dance. Names I had never heard, account numbers that made my head spin. But the most terrifying thing was the methodical nature of it all. This was no reckless man, but a professional. He had method, a network, the capacity to harm many others. That realization made my blood boil. Fear transformed into something cold and sharp. A plan. I photographed each page, noted every clue. Every piece of information was a brick in the wall I would build to trap him, and at the same time, a pain deeper than lost money gripped me. Shame for letting my daughter step into that abyss. I wanted to scream, to rush to him and tear him apart, but experience told me to be wise. Anger needed a path, and now that notebook was the map. Before closing it, I placed my hand on the final page, where a small note in her familiar handwriting read, "If you read this, don't blame me. I love you, Mom." The word love was tiny, fragile as a scrap of paper. Hot, stinging tears fell. I did not know where she was, but I knew she had tried to leave something, however small, for me to find. And I swore, in the quiet of the room, that every name, every account, every secret in that notebook would be a weapon leading me to justice and, if necessary, to vengeance. Clutching the notebook like a weighty piece of evidence, I left my daughter's room with a resolve both cold and blazing, to bring everything to the full extent of the law, to reclaim what had been lost, and to give my child the answers she deserved. The path to the police station that morning felt endless, as if each step had to carry the burdens of a lifetime. Some light pierced through the leaves, yet inside me, only darkness lingered. The image of numbers, names, and the trembling words, "Love you, Mom," on the last page. I heard the echo of my shoes against the concrete, felt each breath in vivid clarity. For the first time in days, I believed I might find someone who would listen, a safe space where truth could be laid bare, awaiting judgment. The reception desk was cold, smelling of coffee and paperwork, with indifferent eyes, the backdrop to my arrival. I laid the notebook on the counter, flipping pages, reading aloud the lines of accounts, the clear records of fraud, the victims who had lost everything. I told them about the choppy midnight phone call, the final scream, the photo with the note directing me to the northern suburbs.
My eyes burned with hope each time my voice caught, hoping someone would understand the pain of a mother who had no words left to contain it. But across the counter sat a middle-aged officer, closing the notebook, looking at me with professional detachment, icy as steel. You must understand, adults have the right to go where they wish. Without clear evidence of a crime, we cannot act solely on a diary. His words felt like a noose tightening around my throat, suffocating. I tried to explain further. But sir, this is evidence of money transfers, accounts being drained, his schemes. There are names, documents, proof.
He shrugged, flipped a few pages, and handed it back with a hint of annoyance. We need a formal complaint, legal evidence. Your report will be noted, but initiating an investigation requires more criteria. Adults have autonomy. If you wish, you may hire a lawyer. I had faced refusals before. From banks when seeking debt relief, landlords over rent reductions, doctors trying to help my husband, but never had a denial pierced with such a mix of shame and fury. Amid the cold fluorescent light and the steady tapping of keyboards, "We need criteria" became an invisible wall between me and justice. I felt abandoned by a system where the phrase, adult's choice, could shield wrongdoing. A younger officer, attempting empathy, flipped through the notebook, looked at my daughter's handwriting and asked, "Do you have photos, bank transfers, or direct witnesses?" I handed over what I had, photographs of the notebook pages, receipts, the midnight call recording, a few transfer slips my daughter kept. They recorded, photographed, and entered them into a temporary file. Yet when I asked whether they could freeze the accounts or begin surveillance, the answer remained slow, legalistic. We will review, but we cannot promise immediate action. The silence that followed those words was heavier than refusal itself. A question turned inward. Has this mother done enough? Provided enough proof? But deep down, I knew this was not my fault, that my child had fallen into a trap. Their adult's problem. A phrase so clinical it eases conscience, revealed a harsh truth. Systems have limits, and when those limits are reached, people like me will receive no timely protection from the law. Leaving the station, I carried the stamped copies, but not hope. On the way home, sirens, music from cafes seemed to ripple in another world. My world was now a battlefield where waiting could kill hope. I thought of my child, of the line, "Don't blame me, Mom," at the notebook's end, and a deep anger arose, not at the police's apathy, but at the fact my daughter was in the hands of evil with no one to rescue her. The decision did not arise from impulse, but from clear strategic thought. If justice is slow or hopeless, I cannot rely on it entirely. I am a mother, and maternal instinct can be the strongest force to break through every barrier. I understood I had to act myself, gather more evidence, track accounts, investigate the names in the notebook, and learn to wield tools I had never used. I would not become an enemy of the law, but I would become someone always one step ahead. On the way home, I paused before an antique repair shop, peering into the grimy glass. My reflection stared back, a mother torn apart, yet with eyes burning with a different light. Cold, determined, wise. I gripped the notebook like a vow. If the law cannot protect my daughter right now, I will become the hand of justice myself. The decision to take matters into my own hands rolled forward like a snowball down a mountainside, growing bigger, sweeping up everything in its path. Leaving the police station with the stamped copies, I did not return home to wallow in grief. I returned to plan. I looked at my wedding ring, once a symbol of vows and simple happiness. The ring had worn thin, like my trust before this blow. I slipped it off, examined it one last time, the metal lost, solitary on my empty finger, and took it to the pawn shop. The cold clink of money in my pocket sent shivers down my spine, but I knew it was the only gift my daughter and I could use to buy back the truth. I found a private detective through a trusted acquaintance at the market. He wasn't like the men in novels, no trench coat, no fedora, just a man in his 40s with dark eyes, appearing to have spent more nights awake than asleep. When I opened the notebook, he was silent, flipping through the pages, then nodded. Not out of emotion, but out of efficiency. "You have determination.
he said. "That's the greatest weapon." I paid him, hearing the cold sound of money drop into his hand like a small sentence handed down to fate. The first task was learning. I had imagined this autumn would be spent knitting, tending the garden, not poring over digital bank statements. But now, each letter, each symbol in the transactions became a clue. I asked the detective to show me how to read the statements, how to spot traces of transfers, timing, branch numbers, strange codes banks often use to conceal activity. I sat by him, hands trembling but eyes bright, learning a new language, the language of money and deceit. He taught me to trace accounts, from recipient accounts following the path of withdrawals all the way to the final point where the money vanished into looters' hands. There were nights I didn't sleep, sitting at the old table, flashlight on printed pages, underlining every number, connecting them with red pen. I saved everything on my phone, photographed, marked addresses, each tiny clue like footprints in the sand, leading to where he hid. The detective helped me contact a few women from the list. They were silent at first, then cried, then spoke. Their stories cut into my heart like knives. Women forced to sell homes, flee towns, children left without books. Every word was an echoed plea, and I realized I was not just acting for my daughter, but for these lost shadows of women as well. Step by step, I narrowed the net. Transfers led to a shell company in the suburbs, then through a chain of accounts at a small bank. The detective and I slept in cheap rooms, following the money, waiting. At times it seemed hopeless, hours staring at silent screens, then a small notification popped up, a new transaction. My heart nearly burst. It was the ticking of fate. I followed it, using temporary phone numbers, sending fake investment messages, even impersonating curious voices to lure him out. Each time, danger pressed like heat on my neck. But fear no longer made me hesitate. It became fuel. When dawn light crept through the cheap room, the detective said, "We have an address." An abandoned warehouse in the outskirts, near an industrial cluster, old signs hanging askew. I went there on an early autumn day, the wind biting my face. The building was empty, the roll-up door rusted, but fresh tracks were visible, tire marks, a discarded cigarette. I slipped inside, heart hammering. Arguments, footsteps, then a light flicked on. He wasn't alone. Several women's shadows surrounded him. I stood in the dark, holding my breath, watching. The man, whose face I had burned into memory, appeared with casual ease, as if the world revolved around him.
But now, I was no longer the naive mother. I was someone who had learned to read a predator's gaze, to recognize false gestures. I quietly observed, recording audio and taking photos with my phone hidden in my clothes. Every shot, every clip became evidence. I heard him talk about the next round, about the upcoming victims, about handling women who refused. His words were a self-confession. My mind felt icy, but my heart burned. Not with blind revenge, but with the fire of a cold, calculated plan. I had to gather enough to not just trap him in stealth, but to have proof that could put him on trial, or at least leave him nowhere to hide. Sometimes I wondered, had I become the person I once hated? Days of surveillance changed me. I learned to keep limits, not to break laws, not to let anger blind me. I learned to think like a strategist: press, wait, retreat, then strike. I contacted a few former victims collecting statements. I prepared a body of evidence for a major plan I believed would expose all the crimes. Then, one late afternoon, as the sun fell, I looked at my daughter's photo in my pocket, rereading the tiny words, "Don't blame me, Mom," and told myself, everything I'm doing, selling the ring, studying banking, hiring a detective, moving in the shadows, is to restore to her a piece of the world that was stolen. I had stepped beyond the role of mother alone to carry the title of bearer of my own justice. And in my heart, one thing was certain. Wherever my daughter is, whatever the outcome, I will not let go until the truth is revealed and the one behind it faces the consequences.
After days of intensive surveillance, collecting evidence, and piecing together every fragment like a meticulous model maker, I knew it was time to take a bolder step. Not just observing from outside, but stepping into the very place where he felt safe. The detective handed me a series of photos, some covert video clips, and an address in the suburbs where he lived with a new woman. Looking at the house, a cold shiver ran through me. Not fear, but determination, forged from pain. Every plan, every sleepless night, every coin from the wedding ring, all pointed to one path, getting close enough that he could no longer evade the truth I carried. I spent the following days preparing my role. I had never acted for anyone, but now I had to master it. I cut my hair, lightly dyed the gray strands, practiced bowing politely, learned the gestures of a housekeeper, folding towels, carrying cups without a sound, observing without being observed. The detective advised, "Don't be conspicuous. You just need to be a piece of their everyday puzzle." I nodded, my heart trembling, but resolute. A mother now had to masquerade as a servant, bitterly ironic, but if it was the path to my daughter, I accepted every humiliation. The day I arrived, the sky was clear, like a commercial backdrop, sunlight glinting on the small stone statues before the door. The house was grand, white fences, neatly trimmed lawns, a mirror of the wealth his face had once flaunted in photographs. I stood at the gate, calm but gripping a folder of fake job applications. Another name, another history, with only one objective: get inside. The head housekeeper opened the door, eyes scrutinizing, but I had practiced my polite bow and standard greeting. I spoke softly. "I'd like to apply for the full-time housekeeper position. I have experience." Everything unfolded like a script. They allowed me a few days of trial observation. I knew it was only the first step, but also the foundation for a larger plan. The young woman living with him surprised me in a cold way. She was young, elegantly dressed, with sparkling designer bags and a trained smile to greet guests. She looked like she had stepped out of a magazine, but her eyes carried a hollow emptiness, like a flower nurtured by money, not love. They welcomed me with casual ease, suspicion absent. He, the man whose every gesture I had studied, appeared in a simple suit, walking into the room like the master of the universe. When he glanced at me, my heart nearly stopped. His eyes skimmed over me like a fleeting wind, not pausing. My silver strands, the lines of time on my face, my thin shoulders, all hid me. It was a strange salvation. I silently thanked the gray hairs for forming a veil across my face. The housekeeping job brought me closer to their private life than I had imagined. I saw calendars taped on the office wall, appointments, phone numbers, names of investor partners, matching the entries in my daughter's notebook. I quietly slipped my hand into drawers when no one looked, photographing with a tiny phone hidden in my clothing. Each step, each clatter of dishes matched the rhythm of my heartbeat, yet I controlled my breathing and expression. I learned their habits, meal times, sleep schedules, unexpected visitors. I learned his phone tone, smooth, confident, but occasionally laced with anxiety when discussing large upcoming transfers. The young woman always wore bright clothes, constantly with her phone in hand. At first, she appeared friendly, asking my name, background. But every answer I gave was measured like a needle, probing for weaknesses. Once, she pulled me aside, looked straight into my eyes and said, with suspicion and curiosity, "Where are you from? You look different from everyone here." I smiled, offering polite replies while mentally noting every detail, how she pressed her nails,
lipstick marks on a teacup, jewelry boxes in a glass cabinet. I needed more than appearances. I needed evidence he would never suspect. One night, after everyone had gone to bed, I stayed in the kitchen, ostensibly cleaning, but truly waiting. My heart nearly leapt from my chest as I heard the lock click. A brief phone call, then soft footsteps in the hallway. He walked through the living room, smoking, speaking on the phone about the next withdrawals. I stood behind the half-open door, listening and recording. In his voice were arrogance, but also glimpses of fear. A man cornered by his own schemes. I realized he was not the flawless master. He was afraid, calculating escape routes. I was not just a housekeeper to eavesdrop. I observed his behavior with the young woman. In rare moments when they were together, I saw him perform gestures of fake affection, hand on her shoulder, calling her by name, speaking sweetly. But upon closer inspection, they were mechanical motions, not from the heart. The young woman, at times, looked at him with deep loneliness, a worry money could not mask. I wondered, did she know? Did she see hints of the fake partners, the drained accounts? Or was she merely a pawn, used to color the curtain he hid behind? Every day I recorded what I saw in a small notebook hidden in my collar. I wrote times, names of visitors, suspicious words, photos, audio clips. Everything gradually formed a charge sheet. At times, I felt almost swallowed by the surrounding deceit. But within that deceit, I found strength. Truth always leaves traces, and I would follow them like a hunter tracking a trail. Sometimes in the kitchen mirror, I caught my own reflection. An older woman, streaks of gray, eyes rimmed with sleepless nights. I thought of my daughter in the small photo tucked in my pocket. I whispered, "Mom is here. Mom will not leave." He still hadn't recognized me, and that was my greatest advantage. I moved lightly, spoke less, listened more. In every secretive moment, I felt a slow-growing power, the power of one who knows pain intimately and has learned to wield it in battle. And as night fell over that steadfast garden, I knew the final confrontation was drawing near. After days and nights of living like a shadow in hiding, I felt like a butterfly with brittle wings, forced to fly into the darkness in search of light. Living under that roof, disguised as a housekeeper, gave me a silent privilege to see, to hear, to touch fragments of his life that outsiders could never access. I didn't just listen to his phone calls. I listened to the words he chose. Safe investment, quick profit, just trust me. Phrases I had once heard my daughter utter innocently, now piercing my chest like needles. Every time he invited a new woman to the house, every time he presented a profit opportunity with seductive eyes, an old wound reopened. He used the same tricks, sweetness at first, soothing promises, gradually demanding trust, then money. And the young woman, her eyes shining as if hypnotized, handed over her signature, her money, even her heart, to empty words. I recorded everything, not out of blind hatred, but because truth needed evidence. I photographed every document he handed victims, captured hastily signed contracts, secretly filmed his coaxing presentations, storing them on a tiny phone hidden beneath the tablecloth. Once, he handed a woman a capital transfer fee slip, pre-filled with bank name and account number, asking her to deposit money to guarantee. I photographed it silently, my back cold. I even recorded his offhand remarks. When he thought only we were listening, he sneered at a former victim, calling her weak, ruined by love. Words like a slap, yet also a confession of his predatory nature. Each piece of evidence was a shard of the network he wove from lies. I brought these shards together, connecting accounts, tracing money, reading numbers with a specialist's precision, knowing when he would withdraw funds, the branch codes he used to obscure them, his habits to erase traces. Some nights I stayed awake until dawn, eyes blurred from fatigue, hands aching from continuous filming.
Yet my mind sharp, anticipating his withdrawals, reading his banking patterns, detecting the subtle signs of cover-ups. I sent audio clips to the detective via a secure app, but I was the one who understood every nuance, every pause that spoke volumes. Watching women cry, trembling with withdrawal slips, I saw my daughter's face in each sob. They ranged in age, some as young as my daughter, some older than me, but all shared the same panic. Trust betrayed, livelihood swept away. Some looked at me with pleading eyes upon realizing they'd been deceived. Others turned away, fearful of confrontation. I listened, took notes, comforted, coaxed, encouraged them to recount their stories in detail, each testimony a vital piece of the larger picture.
One woman cried, recounting how she had sold her last plot of land to invest. Her husband had abandoned her. Her grandchild had to leave school. Another repeated a string of account numbers my daughter had jotted down, numbers that served as a compass, guiding me through the swirling currents of money. At times, I felt perched on the edge of two selves, the mother, shattered by a lost child, and the cold hunter. When a new woman was coaxed into signing documents, I wanted to leap forward, tear everything apart, scream at him in rage. But I knew a rash act would destroy the evidence and the plan. I learned ruthless patience. Collect enough proof so that when I exposed him, no one could call it personal vengeance. That's why I worked like a forensic expert, meticulously filming corners, snapping photos, recording even the faintest sounds. One rainy night, as he persuaded a woman to send money into a project, I switched on a light, pretending to drop a teacup, then knelt to gather the pieces as if by accident. When she turned, I spoke softly. "Did you fill out all the information?" A small question, yet enough to make her pause, glance at the form, and spark a flicker of doubt. He gritted his teeth, hastily explained, attempting to regain trust, but even a moment's hesitation revealed a gap. Later, when she left, I comforted her, slipping a fake business card I had prepared, promising to help verify the information. It was my way of gently guiding her out of the web of lies without frightening her. I was no longer afraid. Fear had been replaced by cold determination. Every recording, every invoice, every inadvertent confession was a bullet aimed at the heart of the man who had shattered my family and countless others. Time spent watching made me sensitive to every detail. How he burned documents, used anonymous numbers, exploited the young woman as a shield before society. I memorized, printed, marked, and arranged everything chronologically. When the time came, I would expose it all, not merely for revenge, but to prevent him from stealing anyone else's life. Deep inside, I understood that this journey was not just a mother's fight. It was a battle for the silent, unknown women, victims once too ashamed to speak, who now, under the cold light, were finally finding a voice. The days of surveillance had taught me to distinguish every sound in that house. The footsteps sowing silence, the faint creak of a closing door, the click of a lighter when he smoked late at night. One late night I stayed awake, waiting as usual, my mind tense, knowing that any small detail could be a clue of life or death. He returned, his steps heavy, the scent of alcohol lingering on his clothes. I stood behind the kitchen door, instinctively finding a safe spot to listen without being seen. A dim nightlight glowed, the clock nearing 2 a.m., the balcony outside sparkled with streetlights like alien eyes. His phone rang, and the voice on the other end sliced through the quiet. He picked up, slurring slightly, a quiet laugh laced with intoxication. I held my breath, tensing. He began speaking. First, a few work-related lines, minutes about an upcoming round. Then his voice slipped, as if the alcohol made the words spill truths he could not hide. "The girl's dead. I don't need to worry anymore," he said, his tone detached, cold. as if naming an old, used-up scroll. The words shot through me like an electric current. I froze, my heart pounding as if it would burst, my mouth numb, my mind stunned. My daughter was dead? The phrase, "the girl's dead," looped in my head like a warped melody, each note a needle stabbing deep. I remembered the trembling voice from that call 2 weeks ago, the scream cutting off, then silence. Now, all those fragments converged into a horrifying conclusion. I wanted to leap from my hiding place, storm into the room, knock everything over, scream her name. But reason, sharpened by experience and fear, held me back. Any rash move now would destroy the evidence and he could escape, or worse, hide her body forever. I clenched my hands, feeling the ache in my bones, and in that moment, a different cold washed over me. Not the chill of night, but the icy clarity forged from grief.
I recalled every invoice, every audio clip, every glance from the women he had victimized.
He had once erased their sweat and tears with empty promises. Now he said the girl's dead, as if it were inevitable, just another number in a ledger. Yet his words, brutal as they were, became precious evidence, a fleeting confession in his drunken haze. I quietly turned on my recorder, capturing every tone, every pause. Each word he spoke was now a brick in the wall of accusation. I stepped away from the door, dizzy, and left the house silently, as if walking in a dream. The cold of night cut across my face, yet I felt no chill. My steps faltered, but my purpose was clear. I needed to know whether my daughter was alive or not. Back in my rented room, I opened my evidence notebook, piecing together and comparing. Account names, addresses he frequented, references to handling in other calls. Everything now a compass pointing the way.
I called the detective, my voice trembling but urgent, reporting the call. I sent the audio immediately, urging him to come, and we dove into the work with a cold fever. Memories surged. My daughter as a little girl, tiny hands clutching my fingers, laughter in the kitchen, innocent moms, echoing from another era. The sense of loss pressed heavily, yet it transformed into something else. An uncompromising resolve. I imagined every possibility. She had been beaten, kidnapped, hidden in some distant place, or worse, she was gone. Each scenario choked me. Each scenario compelled me to act immediately. We could not rush blindly. Impatience would only let him escape. I asked the detective to check nearby medical facilities, morgues, hospitals around his haunts. Simultaneously, I secretly contacted a trusted lawyer I had been referred to, a woman who had helped a neighbor in a similar case. Every probe sparked, a faint light in the dense night.
I knew I was stepping onto a path with no room for weakness. Yet, as things began to move, phones ringing nonstop, messages confirming inquiries at labs, another fear rose, fear of what we might uncover. I dreaded seeing an irreparable truth, the frozen gaze of my child in a moment of void. But I feared even more if I did nothing. So, in the darkness, amidst the lingering smell of tobacco and the traces of alcohol in his voice on the recording, I forced myself to stay calm, packed the documents, and vowed, if she is gone, I will not let him live in peace. If she is alive, I will pull her out of that hell at any cost. That promise rang in my heart, cold, sharp, and unshakable.
After hearing his drunken, accidental confession, my heart froze and shattered into 100 pieces. One part of me, the mother, screamed, wanting to rush in, to find, to save my child at any cost. The other part, colder and more rational, saw a different path. If he had truly taken my daughter's life, her honor, her youth, and that of countless other women, letting him live in peace would be the ultimate betrayal. From that moment, silence was no longer cowardice. It was a weapon. I decided I would not call the police right away. I chose silence, choosing to act from the shadows,
to see how he would react to what I would place before him. My silence was not impotence. It was the resonance of a plan nurtured by grief and wisdom. I reviewed everything I had: my daughter's small notebook, the audio recordings, the invoices, the testimonies of other victims. I had evidence, clues, and most importantly, time. Time to draw him into the very trap he had once woven for others.
I wanted him to fall not only from exposure, but by the very thing he coveted most: greed.
I would use his greed to bring him down. That thought did not come from blind anger. It came from cold calculation. I imagined his laugh when deceiving a new victim, the eager glint in his eyes when mentioning large sums of money. I wanted to give him an opportunity too tempting to refuse, a bait he would leap at, and in that moment, every rope would tighten. I recruited victims he had harmed, gently reopening their wounds, persuading them to recount everything in writing. I collected bank statements, receipts, sworn declarations, and assembled them into a picture that could not be denied. I made their pain tangible, their words something his webs of deceit could not refute. Many nights, my heart wrestled between two extremes, wanting to see him fall into the abyss by his own cruelty, yet fearing my child was lost forever.
I reminded myself that every step must have a clear purpose, with acceptable consequences. Not to be dragged into meaningless violence, but to let justice, in my own form, be done. I was a mother, but now also a weaver of truth. I had to be meticulous, wise, and, sometimes, ruthless. The wedding ring had been sold. The money was no longer large, but it was a token of resolve. I used part of it to maintain my covert work, hiring essential services, sustaining my clandestine life, supporting a few victims brave enough to stand up. Most of my energy went into creating situations he could not resist, forcing him to expose himself, to reveal himself through repeated acts of greed. I revealed no details of the plan, only to those who needed to know. Each person was given a small task, enough to remain within control, yet serving as a link in the chain of evidence. I assumed other identities when needed, appearing under different guises in his world, not to attack directly, but to elicit reactions. He, with his predatory instincts, did not recognize the soft trap woven with sweet words and promised sums. Every time he boasted about a new deal, I knew he had touched the bait. And then, like dominoes, the scenarios I calculated began to unfold. Blocked money transfers, old witnesses, seizing the chance to speak up, came forward. Old invoices were handed to authorities through legal channels. I remained silent, yet quietly triggered each link so that his network of greed would crumble from within. Sometimes, in the stillness of night, when only the ticking clock remained, I asked myself, am I becoming the person I despise? Does revenge erode the mother in me? The answer was not simple. There were moments I looked in the mirror and did not recognize the face. Colder, harder eyes. But I always reminded myself of the reason, not to satisfy disgust, but to prevent him from harming anyone else, to give voice to those who had been lost, and if possible, to reclaim for my daughter a fragment of justice, however late. That small but crucial difference separated blind revenge from purposeful action. As each piece of evidence fell into place, he began sensing unease. I saw it in the way he looked out the window, in the frequency of his calls, in the worry seeping into his voice. That was when my silence worked. He chased his own security, made hasty moves, leaving traces. Each time, I and the victims added another brick to the case. Each brick shook the foundation of his lies. I did not boast of my actions to anyone, but deep in my heart, I knew this path was the final choice of a desperate mother. I accepted solitude, accepted the cost. For if formal justice was slow or hopeless, who else would rise if not those most harmed?
Silence was the test, and when the right moment came, I would no longer be silent. I would pull the curtain of lies down so the world could see the true face of the man who had sown tragedy across so many families, including my own. The clock ticked steadily, like a bridge between silence and the next action. And in that quiet moment, I knew it was time to wield the cruelest weapon, turning his own greed into an irresistible trap. After nights spent gathering every shred of evidence, after making him hesitate a few times with subtle touches to his network, I did not rush into legal action because I needed to watch him expose himself. The idea did not come from folly or recklessness. It was born from cold calculation. He was driven by desire, and that desire would be the gap I would pierce. I told no one the details of my plan. I prepared my role meticulously, like an actor rehearsing for the final act. I became someone else, a wealthy, elegant, lonely widow, appearing just when he hungered for new opportunities. In a seemingly stylish but simple dress, with a silk scarf lightly covering silvered hair, I stepped into his world with a smile both friendly and enigmatic. I did not speak of sleepless nights, of my daughter's small notebook, or the dried tears on my pillow. I brought a different story, one that made him believe he had found a new gold mine for his ambitions. I crafted a backstory befitting the role of the widow investor, a woman who had failed in marriage, now with a sum to invest safely. Someone seemingly susceptible to charming words and promising numbers. I learned to speak of profits in the language he adored, dropped hints about a temporary fund ready to be placed into a promising project, but I revealed nothing more. He, with his predatory instincts, smiled like a beast sensing prey. His eyes shifted from nonchalant to eager. I had seen that look in recordings, in his acts of seduction toward victims. Now, I directed it toward myself, letting it betray his greed. I used everything I had collected, the list of past victims, invoices, recordings, his phone habits, as the backdrop for my performance. I let him believe I was gullible, that I would transfer money into his investment account to initiate a major series of transactions. But I was careful. Every move within legal limits, every interaction aimed at gathering more evidence. I did not guide the path of the money. I only created an illusion too tempting to resist. He leapt in like a hypnotized man, betting his greed on the table, while I, in the guise of the widow, continued the act until he delivered everything he thought was the prize. During our meetings, I showed him trust, offered vague financial advice so he believed he could control and manipulate me. He spoke of withdrawal plans, of how he invested and maneuvered through loopholes. I glanced lightly, recording every word, every gesture, knowing that these careless details would tie him to his own game. Once proud to be the controller, he now bound himself with the trap of greed I had set. At the decisive moment, when he believed victory was assured, he did what he had forced his victims to do. He transferred the entire sum into the investment account he believed belonged to me, an account he thought would hold an easy praise money. I sat there, eyes on the rain-streaked window, unmoving, listening to his breaths like a symphony of triumph. But I had accounted for everything. The evidence he had inadvertently exposed, the words spoken in drunken solitude, the times he used fake identities to conceal his actions. When the money flowed into the source he thought was the prize, I allowed him to savor that moment, because that very enjoyment would lead him to greater mistakes. And then, like a deliberate magic trick, I disappeared. Not in flight like a criminal, but from his sight, to transfer the collected evidence and data to those who could act, victims ready with testimonies, a lawyer prepared to sue, and select media channels quietly chosen to reveal the truth at the right moment. My disappearance stunned him. He realized he had been duped, not reassured. He looked at the account balance and saw, not his money, but proof of a plan tightening around his neck. I left in the night, carrying a photo of my daughter and the little notebook now filled with new notes, the notes of a man who had played his part. On the way home, I felt no joy, no gloating, only a cold, deep satisfaction, the knowledge that I had placed the first brick in the wall that would stop men like him. I knew my actions might not be entirely lawful, but in a world where the law moves slowly, where victims' pain is ignored, sometimes a mother must deliver justice in her own way. As night deepened and the streets emptied, I sat upright, listening to my steady heartbeat, not from triumph, but from a promise not yet fulfilled. Even if he lost his money today, my journey was far from over, and what I needed now was not just to reclaim funds, but to restore my daughter's honor and ensure that man would never have the chance to harm anyone again. He disappeared for one night, and then everything began to move at the speed I had orchestrated. After vanishing from his sight, I did not hide in ignorance. I threw myself into a meticulous chain of actions, transferring evidence, contacting lawyers, and arranging secret meetings with the victims he had harmed. Testimonies were gathered, bank statements cross-checked, his drunken confessions recorded and delivered to the authorities, all coldly interlocking pieces which, when assembled, would expose the true face of the man. I worked in the shadows, but my goal was clear. When the light of the law shone, he would have no escape. And that light arrived, not in the noisy form of the press as I had feared, but as sirens, the pounding footsteps of uniformed officers. On a rainy afternoon, as always, rain seemed to accompany the important moments of my life. When the authorities stormed the house he had once considered a safe haven, I stood at a distance across the street under a worn umbrella, drenched, heart pounding. That distance was just enough to remain unrecognized, yet close enough to witness the unfolding of the scene I had painstakingly staged. The police swept in like crashing waves, calling names, searching, reading arrest warrants. I saw him stagger, clinging to the half facade of the world he had fabricated, darting eyes, confusion, not yet understanding why the entire dirty curtain had been lifted at once. His hands trembled as he fumbled for his phone, tried to make contact, but the net had closed. I watched the officers place their hands on his shoulders, clasping handcuffs around his wrists. The scene slowed in my mind, every movement etched into memory. The young woman living with him stood nearby, eyes wide, not in shock, but in the delayed recognition of collapse. Once a glittering mask, she now appeared weary, her face faded by truth. A few victims were present. They stood silently, crying softly, unsure how to process the justice that had returned. I looked at them, the faces I had known in darkness now emerging into the light, and a feeling both relieved and painful surged. Relief that he was caught, pain at the knowledge that some wounds might be too deep to heal. The moment he realized I was there seemed to slow time. His eyes scanned the crowd, and in that instant, the once haughty, self-satisfied gaze flickered with recognition. Not remorse, but awareness that he had been duped, exposed. He looked directly at me, as if to ask, "Why are you here?" But I stood there, under the rain, face soaked, eyes unyielding. His fleeting recognition, perhaps in the lines of my face, my tone, or something in the way I stood among the crowd, came too late. The prey, the victim, the shadow he had considered insignificant, had become the one to pull the curtain down. That brief gaze was not enough to undo his deeds. It passed through me like a cold stone, reminding me of the weight of the moment. I did not rush forward, nor utter a single vindictive word. Justice had arrived by paths I could not walk alone. Not by hand, but by procedure, by evidence, by testimony.
I knew I had acted correctly in maintaining silence over the past days. Had I reported early, he might have fled, destroyed evidence, or, crueler still, harmed my daughter again. Now, as he was escorted away, handcuffs clicking softly against the pavement, I felt a complex emotion. Not entirely relief, not entirely satisfaction, but deep fatigue mingled with a hint of fairness. Rain poured over my shoulders, soaking my coat. Yet I did not feel cold. Passers-by murmured. The flashing lights of emergency vehicles shimmered, and I knew the story was not over. Court hearings lay ahead. Testimonies needed reinforcement, and above all, my daughter had yet to appear.
I stood there, imagining her steps, trembling, eyes meeting mine, or the opposite. The moment I would confront a painful truth. Both scenarios sent chills down my spine, yet I had learned to keep my steps steady along that path. When an officer approached to shield me from the crowd, asking a few brief questions, I remained silent. I had delivered everything necessary to the detective and lawyer. Now my task was to wait, observe, and be ready if a new lead appeared. I pressed my daughter's photo deep into my coat, my finger tracing her tiny face in the damp picture, whispering an unspoken promise. Mom will not stop. He was led away, his eyes clouded as if he had just lost an entire false kingdom. I stepped back from the crowd, leaving behind the noise and lights, carrying a fragile belief that, though the story was far from over and the wounds deep, today marked a step, the first step, in returning a measure of justice to the victims and to my daughter.
In the rain, I stood there, knowing the battle was not yet over. But at least the first demon had been bound. The quiet after the day he was taken away stretched long, like a taut string released, leaving in me a mix of emptiness and relief. Preliminary hearings, witness statements, and the whirlwind of legal paperwork drained me. I handed all the evidence to the lawyer, coordinated with the detective, and awaited each step of the law. Yet amid those efforts, another emptiness persisted. My daughter had not yet appeared. He was bound, but the place where she lay, if she was still alive, remained a secret no one had revealed. I told myself to be patient, yet the mother in me could not endure waiting in uncertainty. Then, one drizzly afternoon, as I was organizing files in a small room, the postman called. He handed me a worn envelope, stamped from a hospital in a distant province, the postal mark smudged black by rain along the way. My heart constricted. Even prepared for the worst, I could not stop the tremor as I tore open the envelope. Outside, my daughter's handwriting, the script etched deeply in my heart through countless cards and scraps of loving notes, tilted and shaky, as unsteady as the hand that wrote it. The letter opened like a call from hell, a thin sheet, a corner damp, ink smeared, like tears or blood had fallen. She addressed me with a nickname, then abbreviated everything. Mom, I'm still alive. They left me in Hospital X, isolation ward. I'm injured, many wounds. They say I must be silent. If you read this, come, but be careful. He's not alone. Mom, find area code 092. The clumsy yet complete writing included the hospital address, floor, doctor's name, and a short sentence that choked me. Mom, don't let them see you cry. I'm sorry I stood there, the letter slipping from my hands, the room collapsing into silence. My emotions, relief and pain, anger and love, swirled like a storm. She was alive. That thought shot through me like a jolt of electricity, awakening everything that had gone numb. But fear immediately followed. The blood on the corner, the shaky handwriting, the enforced silence the kidnappers imposed on victims, all warnings that she was restrained, hidden,
suppressed in a cruel system. The letter was not a congratulation. It was a subtle plea for me to find her without being detected. I acted as if infused with new strength. First, I photographed the entire letter, carefully scanning each corner, preserving every ink blot and fold. I called the detective, then the lawyer, reporting every detail: area code, doctor's name, room number. They looked at me with the same question in their eyes. "What can we do immediately?" I replied. "Mom will go." Without waiting for advice, I booked the farthest trip possible.
Every action was swift and calculated, like a person who had endured countless sleepless nights. Preparing documents, taking my daughter's photo, arranging a house sitter, then departing under the night, heart like a wounded bird still struggling to fly. On the bus, the letter rested in my lap, the scent of old paper and ink rising like the morning fragrance of memory. I read and reread every word, scrutinized every mark. The ink could hint at the pen type. The folds could reveal how the letter had been hidden. The postmark traced the envelope's journey. Everything could be a clue. I asked the detective to check cameras near the hospital, discreetly verify patient lists with a doctor acquainted with our lawyer. Every path leading to the hospital was a maze set by the kidnappers. Yet the letter, short as it was, formed a fragile thread connecting my daughter to the outside world. By the time I arrived at the hospital, darkness had fallen.
The grounds were silent, ventilators humming and corridor lights creating a cold, sterile ambiance. I entered, wearing a tired yet determined exterior. I told the receptionist firmly that I was a relative, giving my daughter's name, birth date, and the letter as proof. At first, they shook their heads. Patient records were confidential, but when I calmly presented the postmark, the doctor's name from the letter, and the urgency in my voice, along with the visible ink stains and smudges, their expressions changed. A nurse led me to the administrative area, then to the person in charge of the ward. The door to her room cracked open, and for a moment, my heart stopped. I saw her, lying there, thin, hair messy, bandages on her forehead and hands. Yet her eyes were still there, the eyes that had once looked at me with trust. She glanced at me weakly, smiling faintly, then tried to whisper, "Mom, you're here." I dropped to my knees, grasping her hands, and broke into tears I could no longer restrain. Relief mixed with pain at seeing her injuries, knowing all she had endured. That letter had been her call for help before losing contact, a small plea sent through the barriers of fear. It made me realize that my journey of revenge and seeking justice was not everything. Now, the only thing that mattered more was to pull her from hell and begin the healing. Yet the fire of anger within me did not die. It transformed from vengeance to another mission, to bring her home. Make those who did this pay and show the world that no truth can remain hidden forever. As I held her close, amidst ventilators and the nurse's footsteps, I whispered words I had kept locked away all those days. Mom will never let anyone hurt you again. Mom will bring justice back to you. That small, torn letter pierced my heart, but it also became a guiding light. Proof that a mother's love, in any circumstance, remains the strongest force to rise and fight to the end. The morning I left the hospital, my hands still scented with antiseptic and the warm bandages of my daughter, I realized that the journey ahead was no longer a series of days devoted merely to revenge. It had transformed into something deeper, something more painful. Redemption. Redemption was not measured in blood or the satisfaction of vengeance, but in every step of reclaiming the fragments of my child's shattered soul, in making up for the months that had been stolen, in ensuring the wounds would not become lifelong scars. I lifted her into the car, wrapped a scarf around her, looked into her gaunt but living face, and in that moment, I felt my heart beating like an ancient drum, both strong
and trembling. She sat with her knees pulled up, eyes fragile as tissue paper, and I saw there all the images of a childhood abruptly cut short. Bedtime stories left unread, flowers scattered on aprons while she tried to bake. My lullabies choked in my throat. I wanted to fill it all with a single embrace, but I knew tears alone could not heal wounds. What was needed now was security, legal procedure, doctors, a safe haven. I had once dreamed of these days, my child safe, me leisurely sipping tea, but reality was tangled between joy and fear, between smiling "thank you" and simmering resentment for what had been lost. On the road home, the rearview mirror reflected a face that startled me. An older woman, eyes deep set, lips pressed thin. I was seeing myself as a stranger. Silver hair fluttered, crow's feet traced around my eyes. But more important than appearance was the gaze, cold, resolute to the point of rigidity. I remembered holding my daughter, singing lullabies with a gentle, earnest voice. Now that voice felt slightly offbeat, for an invisible distance had grown between her and me. The distance of hard decisions I had to make. I wondered, does my daughter need a mother like this? A mother who has learned to hide tears, to act, to seem indifferent so as not to be imprisoned by emotions. Redemption was not just a series of external actions, paying hospital bills, repairing the house, ensuring safety, but also restoring trust, teaching my child how to see the world after trauma. I began step by step, like a restorer of paintings, finding psychological experts, doctors who understood emotional wounds, securing a place where she could sleep without nightmares. Each therapy session was a small battle. She recoiled when someone touched her injuries, flinched at loud sounds, asked questions that twisted my heart. "Mom, why did they hurt me?" There were no easy answers. I could only place my hand on her head, speak in the softest voice. "I'm here. I will stay with you." But now the words came from a face not entirely the same as before. A face that had experienced darkness, learned to fight. I poured everything into it. Time, money, years of struggle, even the exhaustion of old age. I worked with lawyers to ensure those responsible were held accountable so no one could ever touch her again. Long court sessions, testimony that forced me to relive every painful fragment, gradually diminished the man's power in society's eyes. I saw him stripped of the boastful mask he once flaunted. I saw victims finally being heard, and I saw my daughter watching the news, her eyes lighting up at moments, a fragile glimmer of hope. That was the first spiritual recompense I could offer her. But redemption also meant facing myself, the person I had become in this process. Long nights in darkness, I once dreamed of holding a knife for revenge, screaming out in rage. Now I dream of holding my daughter's photo, seeing the wrinkles on my face appear like scratches of time. I wondered, to protect my child, had I lost the softness, the gentleness that once made her run into my arms when afraid? I thought of the words I had spoken in fury, the schemes I used to deceive that man. Had they erased the humanity in me? That question gnawed at me with no immediate answer. Sometimes I allowed myself to be weak, sitting on a park bench, watching my daughter play with other children, crying. I cried for the lost days, the meals without laughter, the unspoken apologies. Crying was necessary to prevent pain from becoming instinctive cruelty. I wanted to teach her that revenge is not the ultimate goal, that we can seek justice without becoming what we despise. But how could I teach that when I myself was tempted by vengeance? The answer, I think, lies in choosing every day. Choosing forgiveness, choosing courage to step beyond pain,
choosing care instead of destruction. The path of redemption was still long.
I brought her home, rebuilt every small corner, repainted her room, rehung her favorite pictures, bought new books, reintroduced lessons she had missed. Each smile from her patched my heart a little. Each time she asked about the future, I tried to paint warm prospects. Mom will go to the market with you on Saturday mornings. Mom will learn to make your favorite dish. These words might be small, but for her, they were seeds of hope. And for me, they were medicine for each broken fragment. Yet, in quiet hours, when she slept soundly and the house was only filled with the ticking clock, I looked into the mirror, and the question remained. Was I still the gentle mother I once was? I had no clear answer. Some days I felt tender again, when she ran into my arms whispering, "Mom," in innocence. Other days, I saw a face of someone else, a person who had paid too much to keep her alive. One thing I knew for sure, even if my face was cold, even if I acted with strategy at times, deep within me remained a mother's warmth. The harsh actions, though they changed me, came from only one place, wanting my child to live, wanting her to heal. And so I continued on each day, not into the darkness of revenge, but walking in the faint light of redemption. I learned to accept that this path would leave marks on me, but those marks did not necessarily erase my humanity. I taught her to tell the story, to remember without letting pain consume her. I taught her that strength is not twisting your nature for revenge, but rising to protect and heal. In the mirror, my reflection may still be cold, distant, but each day, little by little, I strive to warm that gaze through hugs, shared meals, bedtime stories. The journey of redemption was fraught with challenges. The courts were not over. The wounds still bled in memory. Society still watched us with curious eyes.
Yet each day she awoke a little safer. Each time she smiled was a reminder of the worth of every sacrifice. I might never return to the gentle mother I once was, but one thing I knew. Maternal love had pulled me from the abyss and now propelled us toward the shore. And in the rearview mirror, that cold face, though distant, symbolized a mother willing to trade the world for her child's life.